can be connected with some beyond reproach legal authority that wants to protect the rights of the citizens of Detroit. I think the rights need to be protected on every front. And it cannot just be vested in some hope that whoever the elected official of the moment is going to do that. Because people come with their own imprimaturs, with their own understandings. There are persons who don't have an historical framework for where the city has come from, who have no idea that we had to fight for affirmative action in city departments and with the uniformed employees that I referenced earlier. So my action to close down that class of firefighters was absolutely connected with my former role as the only woman director of the NAACP, where we had to join Mayor Young in suing in a lawsuit to make sure that affirmative action could be implemented, because the unions at that time fought it in the courtroom. So everybody's not going to have that framework, and it's not their fault. It's just what is. Mm-hmm. So there are, I know, 30-year-olds walking around now who have no idea that positions that now look as if we were always there, like police, and fire, and even accountants inside the city. That has not been the case. I'm very proud of a vending ordinance that after many years I was able to get approved this year that demands that persons who have followed all the rules in terms of paying licenses and fees with the alleged Consumer Affairs Department has been de-staffed and is now somehow tied to the Building Safety and Engineering in room 105 on the first floor. But heretofore, it was hard to sell a hot dog in downtown Detroit unless your last name was Illich. So I've had to just, and that issue was not at the top of my hit parade in terms of my coming on council issues. Mm-hmm. I came on supporting African Town, which is now Paradise Valley, that district, and supporting a number of other issues addressing predatory behaviors. So I did not know that this was going to be one of my issues. It has become one of my issues because of a critical need that has come to me from citizens. The vendors were knocking on my door saying, I'm getting tickets. So I had to get up out of my bed and go to Eastern Market on that Market Street Bridge too many Saturdays to protect the vendors from errant officers who were targeting them for tickets, claiming that they had no right to sell even though they had permits and licenses, and they paid fees to do that. So it's been a long-going fight. Finally got some support from the executive branch. Mayor Kilpatrick, Deputy Mayor Anthony Adams actually sent out something across the wire to all law enforcement saying there's a moratorium on tickets to any vendors. That was at my request. It's not 100% successful, but it did stop the huge siege of ticketing and harassment that had been going on. And then we said they have the right to not only sell hot dogs, as long as they meet all the standards. They can sell African garb, they can sell T-shirts, they can sell sunglasses, they can sell those things that they sell in every other major city without harassment. You ought to be able to make a living in Detroit selling, particularly for Detroit residents. So that's been opened up. I played a role at the African World Festival, which was the Museum of African American History. We're trying to move the festival to the museum campus on Warren and St. Antoine. I fought that because you can't have the hold down downtown on the Hart Plaza and let the African World Festival get moved back to the center of the city. Citizens wouldn't understand that. It looked like there's one more thing we're losing. And it's the premier ethnic festival. Some years it's drawn 3 million people. So I had to fight for that, raise the money to keep them there, because one of the critical sponsors, all the companies fell through for obvious reasons. And I used that, since I played that role to help keep them down there, I also used it to leverage the engagement of vendors. So the vendor who sold smoothies last year and this year there was a young adult vendor who came through the Young Adults Reclaiming Detroit, one of my task forces. So that the little laundromat he's trying to operate on Oakland Boulevard, where most of Father Cunningham's Focus Hopes operations are, not really making him any money. So this will allow him and his little family to bring in some revenue. A couple of $1,000s from the African World. That's a good thing. We have a coffee shop, art, art boutique, authors, support vendors, and I believe that young people should have access to capital to help them. It helps them stay in the city. It also helps create an industry in Detroit. I'm the sponsor of the privatization ordinance, which should have been called the anti-privatization ordinance. And it's a tragedy. It is an absolute tragedy. I'm not saying that out of any pride, or because it was passed 7 years before I was elected. It's a disgrace. It's just an absolute disgrace. The citizens of Detroit voted for it as a referendum, and it was very plain and very strong. The referendum directed the council to enact legislation 90 days after the successful passage of the ordinance. One council member was allowed to send it to the law department for review because she didn't think it was legal. Of course, she couldn't do anything with me after I was elected. I came from an activist. I was part of the group that demanded it. So, the Sugar Law Center activists. But it's just a disgrace that when the citizens have stood up and voted on something as critical as privatization to protect the job, they get it. This is the home of organized labor. So if there's ever any city where the workers' jobs ought to be protected against privatization, it should be Detroit. If we don't protect workers in Detroit, then what hope is there for the workers in this country? So that's it. As far as I'm concerned, that is draw a line in the sand. If you don't support workers' jobs against privatized contractors who could come from anywhere, including any other country, then you should not be operating in Detroit. This ought to be the last hope for workers' rights. And when they've been violated, and even though it's now law, the departments, who again we don't manage, the mayor does, they don't always yield to the privatization ordinance, which requires in the ordinance that if there's some consideration of an outside contract, that the union be called to the table and that the workers be given an opportunity to bid. Whenever that is bypassed and not implemented, the city gets sued and we paid out millions. So the last thing, so on the moral issue of the protection of workers, on the one hand, and on the fiscal issue, we can't afford to be losing lawsuits that you know you're going to lose because it's a clear-cut violation of the privatization ordinance. It doesn't make any sense, CENTS or SENSE. Oh, it'll be a never-ending spiral, downward spiral of economic confluence, including a worker who right now works for the water department, who is has a responsibility for addressing broken water mains, who lives here. If this person is losing their position because some private contractor is going to get the responsibility of fixing all the water mains, not doing preventive maintenance like workers do, for fixing the water mains after they're broken, then this worker, who's maybe making $25 an hour, whose family has a one-wage family breadwinner, their house is now at risk. Their departure from the city means that the children in public schools are going to depart. That makes the DPS at risk. The tax base is more at risk. You've got another vacant building standing, which puts the neighborhood at risk and blight. The city may be sued by the representative union with respect to that person losing their job. They may sue for $2.7 million. They're going to win. Then that puts the city's budget at risk. The risk cycle never ends when the privatization ordinance is not adhered to.